There are 11 memory cards in an evidence room in Fairbanks, Alaska, and the last one ends with an hour and 53 minutes of an empty campsite. The camera sits on a tripod facing a fire ring and a gray canvas tent. A man in a brown wool coat crouches in frame, feeds 2 spruce branches into the fire, tells the camera that the shore ice is finally starting to hold, picks up an axe, and steps out of the left side of the picture. His name is Nathan Holt. He is 34 years old. It is a few minutes past 6 in the evening on the 11th of October 2019 at a small unnamed lake in the Clearwater Mountains of interior Alaska, 19 miles from the nearest road. The camera keeps rolling. The fire burns down to coals. The light drains out of the sky 1 frame at a time. Not that evening. Not that night. Not ever, as far as anyone has been able to prove. 6 days later, searchers found the camp exactly as the camera shows it. Tent standing, rifle inside, food cache untouched, the tripod still upright with a dead battery, and no sign of the man who set it there. What separates this case from every other disappearance in the Alaska interior is that Nathan filmed almost all of it. 26 hours of footage across those 11 cards, a running diary of his final 2 weeks on Earth, ending with a recording that captured 18 minutes after he left the frame, a sound that took a forensic audio examiner 2 months to classify. And buried in the last minutes of that same recording, in the near dark, there are 6 frames of something on the far shore of the lake that nobody on the search, nobody in his family, and none of the hundreds of thousands of people who eventually watched the footage online noticed. For almost 3 years. Here is the ground this episode is going to cover. First, the trip itself, 20 planned days at Freeze Up, and the last confirmed message Nathan ever sent, 4 words long, on the 9th of October. Second, the mistake inside the camera, a clock set 25 hours wrong that scrambled the timeline of his final day and quietly fed the theory that hurt his family most. Third, the sound at minute 18 of the final recording, and the hunting camp 2.5 miles south that may or may not explain it. Dr. 20 through 20 meters a Thistiday's Wade, an accident at the waterhole, a stranger across the lake, or a man who chose to vanish, and what Nathan's own footage does to each of them when you actually watch it. And fifth, those 6 frames, 1/5 of a second of light, found by a viewer in 2022, that pushed the Alaska State Troopers to put boots on a shoreline the original search never touched. Everything here is drawn from the recovered footage, the public record of the search, statements Nathan's family released, and reporting from the time. Where the record is uncertain, I will say so, and where a question has no answer, I am not going to invent one. Nathan Holt has a mother, a sister, and a nephew who was 4 years old when his uncle's truck was found empty on the Denali Highway. This story is told with them in mind. Nathan grew up in Palmer, Alaska, about 40 miles northeast of Anchorage, in a house where the Chugach Mountains filled the kitchen window and moose walked through the yard in November. His father took him grouse hunting off the Glen Highway before he was old enough to carry the shotgun, and by high school he was doing solo overnights in the Talkeetnas with a tarp and a wool blanket, the kind of trips that would horrify a modern risk assessor, and that half the boys in Palmer did without anyone thinking twice. After graduation, he trained as a diesel mechanic and spent 7 years working heavy equipment on the North Slope, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, in a place where the machinery has to run at 50 below, and a mistake with hydraulics can take a hand. People who worked with him at Prudhoe described him the same way his viewers later would: methodical, unhurried, allergic to shortcuts. But the schedule wore him down. The fluorescent camps and the flights and the 14 days at a stretch away from the country he actually wanted to be in, and in 2016 he quit, moved into a small place outside Palmer, and started a YouTube channel called Far Country Bushcraft. He filmed on a second-hand camera at first, taught himself to edit from tutorials, and grew the channel the slow way. No clickbait, no thumbnails of himself screaming next to a bear. By the fall of 2019, it had grown to around 61,000 subscribers, which is not enormous, but in the bushcraft world it was a real audience, and the ad revenue plus a little sponsorship from a knife maker in Idaho was covering his bills. If you spend any time in that corner of the internet, you know the type of channel. And you also know Nathan was not the typical version of it. He did not do survival stunts. He did not fake emergencies for the camera, and he was openly contemptuous of creators who did, once posting a 14-minute video breaking down, shot by shot, how a rival's supposedly desperate winter night had been filmed 100 yards from a parked truck. His own videos were slow, careful, almost quiet. A man building a wood stove out of a fuel can, a man explaining why he always carried 2 ways to start a fire, a man spending 9 unhurried minutes on the correct way to test lake ice with a spud bar. He ended nearly every video with the same reminder: to leave a trip plan with someone who loves you. He practiced what he said. Before every trip, he left his sister Kara a written itinerary, and he carried a Garmin inReach satellite messenger programmed to send a preset check-in message every second evening, a device that talks to the Iridium satellite constellation and works from anywhere on Earth with a view of the sky. The trip that fall was meant to be his most ambitious project, a 20-day series he was calling Freeze Up, documenting the 2 or 3 weeks when the interior lakes skin over and the country goes silent. Freeze Up is a genuinely strange window in Alaska. The rivers are too icy to raft and not yet frozen enough to walk. The hunters have mostly pulled out. The snow machines cannot run yet, and for about 3 weeks the backcountry is emptier than at any other point in the year. That emptiness was the whole premise of the series, and it is worth holding on to that fact because the premise turned out to be wrong. On the 28th of September, he drove his pickup down the Denali Highway, 135 miles of mostly gravel that closes to maintenance in October, and left it at a pullout near the Maclaren River. From there he spent 3 days moving north on foot and by pack raft, about 19 miles, ferrying his gear across the Maclaren in a yellow alpaca raft, and then relaying loads up through the tundra benches into the upper Clearwater drainage to a small lake he called Grayling Lake in his notes. That name matters, and it matters in the worst possible way, because it is not an official name. The United States Geological Survey has no Grayling Lake in that quadrangle. It is a nickname, and locals in that country use it for at least 3 different lakes, because grayling are in nearly every piece of clear water in the interior, and naming a lake after them is like naming a street after a tree. Yura had the name. She did not have coordinates because Nathan, like a lot of outdoor creators, deliberately kept his filming locations vague to protect them. He had watched other creators' favorite spots get trampled within a season of appearing on camera. His satellite messenger could have solved all of it, because the inReach can transmit a breadcrumb trail of positions at set intervals. But he had switched off its tracking function to stretch the battery over 20 days, a defensible trade for a man planning to be out 3 weeks with no way to recharge. So each check-in confirmed only that he was alive, not where. The messages arrived stripped of location data. He was, in effect, reporting in from nowhere. The check-ins came in like clockwork. October 1st, October 3rd, October 5th, 7th, 9th. The last one, sent at 9:52 in the evening on October 9th, read, "All good cold ice coming." 4 words. On the evening of October 11th, the next scheduled message never arrived. Kara told reporters she did not panic that first night, because the device had hiccuped before. Once on a trip in 2018, a message had simply failed to send from a steep valley with a narrow slice of sky, and Nathan had a rule against wasting battery on resends. When the 13th also passed in silence, she stopped giving him the benefit of the doubt, and on the morning of October 14th, she called the Alaska State Troopers. Alaska handles more missing person reports per capita than any state in the country, roughly 5 times the national rate, and its search and rescue apparatus moves fast because it has to. The survival window in October in the interior is measured in days, not weeks. By that afternoon, a helicopter was over the Denali Highway, and by that evening they had found his truck, doors locked, a week of dust on the windshield, parked at a gravel pullout that serves as a jumping-off point for 2 entirely different drainages, one running east toward 7 Mile Lake, one running northwest toward the Clearwater Mountains. The truck told them where he had started. It told them nothing about which way he had walked. The search went the wrong way first, and to understand why, you have to understand how thin the information was. Troopers had a nickname for a lake, a truck between two valleys, and one more thing, Nathan's most recent YouTube upload, which had gone live on October 6th on a scheduled timer he set before leaving, a standard practice for creators who bank content so the channel stays active while they are in the field. That video showed him camped on a lake, and within hours of the news breaking, viewers trying to help had done the thing online. Communities are genuinely good at. They geolocated it, matching the ridgeline in the background against topographic profiles the way open-source investigators match war footage to satellite imagery, and they identified the skyline as the country around 7 Mile Lake east of the truck. It was a technically impressive identification. It was almost certainly correct about where the video was filmed, and it was wrong in the only way that mattered. The video had been filmed the previous winter, on a different trip entirely, pulled out of his content bank to fill the gap. Nobody outside Nathan's own hard drives could have known that. For 2 full days, October 15th and 16th, with the temperature dropping through the single digits at night and 2 snowfalls moving through, the air search worked the eastern drainage, flying grids over ground Nathan had not stood on in 11 months. Every hour of helicopter time is finite. Every day of search effort is drawn from a budget of daylight and fuel and crew fatigue, and 2 days of it went east. The correction came from an outfitter's camp on the Mauchlerin, where a hunting guide named in the trooper dispatches reported that back in late September he had watched a lone man ferry a yellow pack raft across the river and head northwest, and had thought nothing of it until he heard the description on the radio. On the morning of October 17th, the helicopter shifted northwest, and at 10:40 in the morning, a spotter saw the yellow raft pulled up on the shore of a small lake in the upper Clearwater drainage, a bright synthetic yellow that does not occur in nature and reads from a mile up. The camp was intact and silent. Fresh snow lay unbroken around the tent. On the tripod by the fire ring, the camera was waiting for them. The footage should have settled the timeline immediately. Instead, it broke it. When the troopers pulled the cards and read the metadata, the final recording was stamped October 12th, 7:06 in the evening. That created a contradiction nobody could resolve. If Nathan was alive and filming on the evening of the 12th, then he had skipped his October 11th check-in by choice. And a man who skips a safety check-in by choice starts to look like a man managing his own disappearance. That reading leaked into early coverage, and for months it shaped how the case was discussed online. It took until the following spring for a technician reviewing the footage to notice that something in card 9 did not add up. A recording stamped mid-afternoon showed the sun sitting nearly on the horizon. And that is a checkable fact because the sun's position is not an opinion. At 63 degrees north latitude in early October, the sun's altitude and azimuth at any given minute can be pulled from astronomical tables to a fraction of a degree, and photogrammetrists use exactly this technique, measuring shadow angles and solar elevation in a frame to date and time photographs in everything from war crimes investigations to insurance fraud. When the technician compared the sun's position in that frame against the tables for that latitude, the numbers only worked if the camera's clock was running 25 hours ahead of true time. 25 is a strange number until you take it apart. A full day plus 1 hour, which is precisely what you get from a clock set in a different time zone and then bumped a day, the kind of error a man makes setting up a new camera at his kitchen table and never notices. Because who checks a camera clock against reality? Every timestamp on all 11 cards shifted back 25 hours. The final recording had not been made on the evening of the 12th. It was made at 6:01 in the evening on October 11th. Nathan walked out of frame at 6:04, and his 10 o'clock check-in that same night simply never came. The footage and the satellite messenger now told one clean, cold story. Whatever happened to Nathan Holt happened within hours, maybe minutes of the moment he left the picture. But the damage from the bad timestamp was already done, and it was done in 2 places at once. Modern search planning is probabilistic. Planners lean on datasets like Robert Coaster's lost person behavior, thousands of historical cases sorted by category, which tell you, for instance, that a lost hiker is statistically likely to be found within a certain radius of his last known point, and the search effort is weighted accordingly. The bad timestamp handed the planners a man with an extra day of travel in his legs, which stretched the probability rings over a far larger area and thinned the effort close to the lake, close to the one place the corrected timeline says everything happened. And the voluntary disappearance theory, born from a clock error, had already attached itself to the family like a burr. So set the theories aside for a moment and just watch his last day, because he filmed it, and it is one of the most ordinary days you will ever see. The first recording on card 11 begins at 7:50 in the morning, October 11. Nathan holds a thermometer to the lens, 9 degrees Fahrenheit, and pans across the lake, which has skinned over with new black ice from shore to shore. Black ice is the good kind. Clear, dense, formed on still water and hard cold without snow mixed in. And it is what he had come all this way to film. He is visibly pleased. He talks about Granling holding under the ice, dark torpedo shapes he can see through the new paint of it, about testing the shore ice in a day or two, and then he says something that nobody thought much of at the time. He says he heard a machine running somewhere far down the valley the evening before, the first sign of another human being in 12 days. He laughs about it. He says the country is getting crowded. On first viewing, it is a throwaway line. On every viewing after, it is the moment the premise of the whole trip, the empty country, quietly stops being true. The second recording begins at 1:20 in the afternoon. Handheld this time. Nathan chops a waterhole through the shore ice a few steps from camp, measures the ice against the axe. The final recording begins at 6:01 in the evening. The camera is back on the tripod, the fire is built up, and the light is going amber behind the ridge. Nathan sits for about 2 minutes and just listens, because the new ice is singing, those long, strange, whale-like booms that lake ice makes as it tightens in the cold, and he wants the microphone to catch it. It is worth knowing what that sound actually is, because it becomes the acoustic floor of everything that follows. As the air temperature drops after sunset, the ice sheet contracts, stress builds until the sheet cracks, and the crack radiates through the ice as a pressure wave. Because ice carries high frequencies faster than low ones, a single crack arrives at your ear smeared out into a descending science fiction chirp, a laser blast falling into a whale's moan, and on a small lake in dead calm cold it happens every few minutes, all night. That is what the microphone is soaking in when Nathan stands. Says he is going down to the water hole to fill his pots before full dark, loops a headlamp around his neck, picks up the axe, and steps out of frame to the left toward the shore, 30 or 40 feet away. It is 6:04. The frame he leaves behind, tent, fire, darkening lake, never changes again. At 6:22, 18 minutes in, the microphone picks up a sound underneath the ice noise, low, mechanical, rising, and then fading over about 40 seconds. At 6:51, there are two sharp reports close together that could be ice fracturing and could be something else. The examiners studied the waveforms for weeks and never reached agreement, because an ice crack at close range and a distant gunshot can produce genuinely similar signatures on a single channel recording. The fire collapses to coals around 7:30. The recording ends at 7:57, when the card fills. Nathan's pots were found the next week, one at the waterhole, one in the shallows. His headlamp and his axe were not at the shore at all. 3 explanations have been weighed against that footage, and each one has a hole in it you could walk through. The first, and the one the search commanders came to favor, is the water. The theory runs like this. Nathan kneels at the water hole in failing light, on new ice over a shelving bottom, and something goes wrong. The lip fractures, he goes in, and 35-degree water does what it does. And what it does is well documented. Professor Gordon Gisbrecht at the University of Manitoba, who has put himself into ice water dozens of times for research, and is known in the field as Professor Popsicle, describes it as the 1-10-1 rule. 1 minute of cold shock, an involuntary gasp reflex, and hyperventilation that can drown you in the first 60 seconds if your head is under when the gasp comes. 10 minutes of meaningful movement before the muscles of your arms and hands cool past the point of gripping anything, which is why people are found floating a body length from ladders they could not climb, and roughly 1 hour before hypothermia itself becomes lethal. So in this theory, Nathan either goes under in that first violent minute, pulled down by a waterlogged wool, or he gets out, soaked, in 9-degree air with dark coming on, and hypothermia begins dismantling his judgment from the top down. Because the brain's executive function is one of the first things cold takes. Hypothermic people do documented, irrational things. They walk away from shelter, they hide under deadfall in the late stages, some of them undress, a phenomenon called paradoxical undressing that has confused investigators for a century. A man in that state could walk into the timber instead of back to the fire he can no longer think clearly enough to find. And in interior Alaska in October, the timber does not give people back. There is real evidence for the water theory. When divers finally got into the lake in June of 2020, after ice out, they found his axe in about 3.5 feet of water, 9 feet out from the waterhole, exactly where a falling man might fling it. And an axe does not walk 9 feet offshore on its own. But the same dives are the theory's problem. The lake is small, its deepest sounding is 42 feet, and cold, and that matters because in water that cold decomposition slows nearly to a stop. The bacterial gas that refloats drowning victims in warm water never builds, and bodies stay where they settle, which means a body in that lake in June should still have been in that lake in June. Between the divers, a side-scan sonar sweep, which paints the lake bed in acoustic shadow and can resolve an object the size of a boot, and cadaver dogs worked along the hole near shore. Dogs that can alert on scent rising through water from a submerged body. The searchers covered that basin about as thoroughly as any water in rural Alaska has ever been covered. They found the axe, one pot, and nothing else. If the lake took Nathan Holt, the lake has been remarkably unwilling to say so. And if he wandered into the timber, 2 snowfalls between the 11th and the 17th had erased whatever track he left, and the ground teams that eventually gridded the near drainages found no boot print, no fiber, no headlamp, nothing. The second explanation is the sound. In 2021, the family hired an independent forensic audio examiner, a man who had previously done acoustic work on aviation accident recordings, to analyze the 6/22 event, and his written findings, which the family released in full, run to 19 pages. The method is worth a sentence because it is why the classification took 2 months. On a spectrogram, a picture of sound with time running one way and frequency the other, an engine does not look like weather or ice. It lays down harmonic stacks, evenly spaced horizontal bands tied to the firing rate of the cylinders, and the fundamental frequency the examiner isolated under the ice noise sat in the range consistent with a small 2-stroke engine, something like a chainsaw, an outboard, or a snow machine, operating at an estimated distance of 1 to 3 miles, direction unknowable from a single microphone, because you need at least 2 spaced microphones to triangulate, and Nathan's camera had a stereo pair separated by the 40-second rise and fall could be the engine changing load or moving, or the atmosphere itself flexing. And that last one matters because on a dead calm, hard, cold evening, a temperature inversion forms. Warm air over cold, and it bends sound waves back down toward the ground, ducting engine noise across miles of country that would swallow it on a windy afternoon. That finding lines up with something the troopers already knew. During the search, they had located a moose hunting camp on Boulder Creek, roughly 2.5 miles south of Nathan's Lake, over a low ridge, occupied that week by 2 men from Delta Junction who were there for the tail end of moose season. The men told investigators they ran a chainsaw for firewood most evenings. They consented to interviews and to a look through their camp. Their story held together, and the troopers stated publicly that they cooperated fully and were never considered suspects. That may be the entire story of the sound. A chainsaw bucking firewood over the ridge, captured by a sensitive microphone under an inversion on a dead calm night. And probably it is. But notice what the recording proves even in the most innocent reading, because it is narrower and harder to dismiss than any theory. It proves that in a piece of country Nathan believed was empty, in the 1 3-week window of the year when it is supposed to be empty, someone with a machine was within earshot of his camp on the last evening of his documented life. And by his own words on card 11, they had been there at least a day. The third explanation is the one that never should have gotten the oxygen it did, that Nathan walked away from his own life. It grew out of the corrupted timestamp, and it fed on two facts that sounded damning in a headline. He had sold his snow machine that summer, and he had withdrawn $2,000 in cash in September. Both had explanations sitting in plain sight for anyone who looked. The seller of a used generator in Wasilla confirmed to reporters that Nathan had arranged to buy it with cash in November. Cash being how used equipment changes hands in Alaska. The snow machine money went to the camera he was filming with, the same camera whose Misset clock started the theory in the first place, which is an irony nobody in the family finds funny. And the theory fails on its own terms if you know anything about how staged disappearances actually unravel. People who vanish on purpose almost always touch their old lives within months. They contact someone, they use a card, they get photographed. The researchers who study pseudocide will tell you the faking is easy and the staying gone is nearly impossible in a networked world. In the 6 years since, Nathan's bank accounts have not been touched. His passport has never crossed a border. His channel's creator account has never been logged into, and no verified sighting has ever been logged anywhere. A man cannot live on nothing forever, and $2,000 is not a new life, it is a used generator. The troopers quietly stopped treating it as a live possibility years ago. Kara has been less quiet about what those months of speculation did to her mother, who was reading strangers' theories about her son's cruelty while his camp gear was still in an evidence room, and she has asked, reasonably, that people who repeat the theory at least watch the birthday sentence on card 11 first. Which brings the story to August of 2022, and a viewer in Michigan. A year after the search wound down, the family, with the troopers' knowledge, uploaded the final recording to Nathan's channel, unedited, all 1 hour and 57 minutes of it, as a way of keeping the case in front of the public. It was watched by hundreds of thousands of people, most of whom experience the case remains open. That is not a formality. The file was actively reworked as recently as 2023. The Far Shore search itself is proof of that, and the troopers have said any credible information will be pursued. But open is also the honest word for where the evidence sits. 26 hours of footage, a 4-word satellite message, an axe in 3.5 feet of water, 40 seconds of an engine, and 1/5 of a second of light. The camera Nathan set on that tripod did exactly what he asked of it. It recorded everything it was pointed at, faithfully, at 24 frames a second, for 1 hour and 53 minutes after he was gone, and it caught things no human witness could have. The engine under the ice song, the light on the far shore. The one thing it could not do was turn, somewhere 30 feet to the left of that frame, in the space between the fire and the water hole, in the 18 minutes between 6:04 and 6:22, is the answer, and the lens never saw it. Kara still renews the missing person flyers at the McLaren River Lodge every spring, driving out when the highway opens, stapling fresh paper over the weathered sheets from the year before. The fishing rod is still in her garage, wrapped. Her son is 10 now, and he knows the whole story because in that family they decided early that Nathan would be talked about out loud, in the present tense, until someone proves they shouldn't. If stories like this one matter to you, told slowly and with the families in mind, a like genuinely helps them find the people who need to hear them. And subscribing to the Treeline tapes means you'll be here for the next case from the far edge of the trees. Thank you for listening, and for keeping Nathan Holt's name in the air a little longer.